Abarigani.
Ujima.
Ujima.
Good evening. My name is Omani Abdullah, and I am a member of the Ubuntu Institute for Community Development in Spartanburg, South Carolina. This is the third in a series of programs focusing during the week of KWANZAA on freedom fighters, the Freedom Fighters Film Festival. And this evening we have two guests with us. The first guest, Brother Ibrahim Abdullah, will give you some background information on him. He's a member of Imam Jamil's Action Network, known as IJAN. He's a time supporter and follower of Imam Jamil's leadership and advocate for political prisoners. He's a father and grandfather who lives in Cleveland, Ohio. And I don't know if I mentioned, but my name is Omani Abdullah.
Good evening. I'm Eva Keith, also a member of Ubuntu Institute for Community Development in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And thank you all so much for zooming in with us for this very important event that's taking place during the Kwanzaa week celebration. I'm going to introduce Sister Afia Ngwaza and tell you a little bit about her. She's the founder, director of the Malcolm Center for Self-Determination. She's a member of the Black Belt Human Rights Coalition, the Black Alliance for Peace organization, and she's a veteran of SNCC and a daughter of Garvey Ice. And this is just a short list of her activism and involvement in the community, and especially with political prisoners. So again, thank you so very much. And we're going to follow up with this with questions for these two important guests, knowledgeable, active people in our neighborhood for our people, and they will be able to share with us some very important information. So thank you.
Brother Ibrahim, I want to get it started by asking if you could give a brief sketch of who Imam Jamil, also known as H.R. Brown, is and his role in the struggle for the liberation of Black people in this country.
Okay, first I'd like to say I thank you all for allowing me to come on your platform. And especially it's an honor to be here with Mama Afia. I've listened to some of her interviews and I'm very honored to share this platform with you. Well, first of all, Imam Jamil Al-Amin was born as Hubert Gerald Brown in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1943. He began his activism very early on. It's known that at age 15, he helped us to organize and stage a walkout at Southern High School in Baton Rouge. And it was in solidarity with the walkout that they were doing at Southern University, which his older brother, Ed Brown, attended. And with Ed Brown's influence on Imam Jamil, who was known as, obviously as Hubert Gerald Brown at the time, he led him into his activism. And Ed Brown eventually was expelled from Southern and he moved to Washington, D.C. and enrolled in Howard University, where he continued his activism and became a member of the Nonviolent Action Group. So with him living in Washington, D.C., Imam Jamil, known as H.R. Brown at the time, went to visit him there and also became more active and, better politically educated and began to, find his way in terms of, his path in struggling for the rights of our people. I know some of the things that he's accomplished. He was in the summer of 1964, he joined the freedom movement in Mississippi under the leadership of Fannie Lou Hamer, who was the head of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. In 1965, he also was working in the anti-poverty program in Washington, D.C. In the summer of 66 and 67, he was appointed by, at the time, the head of the chair of SNCC was Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture, to lead the Alabama portion in terms of, I think, Greene County, Alabama. He was the director of the Greene County Alabama coalition, to where he helped to organize and register people to vote. And later on, he eventually became the chair of SNCC. I believe it was 1967. He was the successor to Kwame Ture. And after that, he was in prison at some time from 1971 to 76. And within that time, and being in prison, he converted to Islam. Once he got out, he relocated to Atlanta, to the West End, where he developed a community. And in that community at the time was a very crime-ridden, drug-infested place. But with the development of Imam Jamil's community there, they cleaned up the community and made it safe for a lot of the people that were in the community where previously it wasn't. And so a lot of people who lived, especially elderly people who lived in the community at that time, welcomed him in his leadership, even if whether they were Muslim or not. It was just a way of him continuing his activism that he had learned from his youth. And even though it may have had an Islamic orientation, but it never changed his political ideas of what it meant to liberate our people and to eventually lead to self-determination.
Okay, thank you for that. Sister Afia, we're aware that you appeared at the United Nations to speak about political prisoners. Can you tell us more about that, please?
I initiated under the visionary and revolutionary leadership of the founding director of the U.S. Human Rights Network, Ujima Baraka, a campaign entitled Putting COINTELPRO Civil Rights Era Political Prisoner Imprisoned COINTELPRO Civil Rights Era Political Activists on the global human rights agenda. That campaign was initiated in 2010, and it was on the occasion of the United States being reviewed under one of its 4 treaty obligations to the United Nations. The first being the Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review, unlike the 3 other treaties, which is the International Covenant for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, xenophobia, and all forms of discrimination, CAT, the Convention Against Torture, and ICCPR, which is the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. The UCCPR is a peer-to-peer treaty. That is when countries review each other, as opposed to the other 3, where the record of each state is reviewed by a committee of experts from various countries and regions throughout the world. The report was done exclusively by myself, representing the Malcolm X Center for Self-Determination, and Stan Willis, representing the National Conference of Black Lawyers. In that report, we raised the issue of political prisoners, prisoners of war, and of exiles. We lobbied members, states, who would then make recommendations, which are really demands, but in diplomatic language, recommendations, calling upon the various countries to come into compliance with their obligations. There were 234 recommendations made to the United States, a historic unprecedented number of demands. We were supported by Cuba, which put their demands in writing, Venezuela, and Iran, which stated their recommendations or demands from the floor. Of the recommendations that were made, 5 of them dealt with political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles in the United States. 2 of them specifically dealt with political prisoners as a category, and 1 of them dealt with naming 2 political prisoners who have become internationally known and recognized, that is Mumia Abu-Jamal and Leonard Peltier. The recommendations were call for the United States to release all COINTELPRO civil rights era political activists. And they are referred to as political activists because the term political prisoner, prisoner of war, and political exiles have political meaning and legal meanings within the diplomatic context. And since no government acknowledges having political prisoners, prisoners of war, or exiles, it is the use of those specific though accurate terms are avoided and used. Instead, are political activists or human rights defenders. The category of political prisoners, as we know it, political prisoners, prisoners of war, and political exiles fits into that category. And as I coined the phrase, in order to establish a specific set of prisoners, COINTELPRO civil rights era, it readily recognized and included Imam, Jamil, Al-Amin, as well as those expressly named. That campaign continued through 2016, and in each of the official reports issued by the Committee of Experts, civil rights, COINTELPRO, civil rights era, human rights defenders, political activists, or as we know, political prisoners, prisoners of war, and political exiles are referenced in various forms throughout the remaining 6 years. In the case of SURJ, we referenced the fact that US political prisoners were engaged in resistance to oppressive laws and practices by the US government based on race. And that as a result of these racist practices and our response to it, various people were murdered, incarcerated, and continue to this day to walk among us as wounded human rights defenders. In SURJ, the report required that the United States issue a report regarding the status of these persons, including the number of persons who were victims of these practices and what intentions it had of addressing these violations. We took essentially the same position with regard to civil rights, which focused on not only the fact that these persons were given sentences of extreme lengths and held in the harshest possible circumstances, but that it was in response to their efforts to advance and protect the civil and political rights of Black people in the United States. CAT, we identified the same group of people, that is COINTELPRO, civil rights era, political activists and human rights defenders who are subject and have been subject to human rights violation as represented by the Convention Against Torture. They are referenced in paragraph 16 of the official report. Their violations include having been held in isolation for not only more than the tolerated 15 days, but that many of them have been held in isolation for years, and others for months. Again, in every instance, the United States was called upon to release and/or to present information as to its intentions of addressing these violations. To this date, no such response has occurred.
All right, thank you, Sister Sophia. Brother Ibrahim, I'll make this segue here. Here in Spartanburg, we have a Saturday class, Sesa Wusuban, where we teach young people about African American history. And we had taken on a project of writing letters to Imam Jamil to sort of lift up his spirits. Can you tell me what actions can people take to see that the wrongful imprisonment of Imam Jamil be overturned?
Okay, well, definitely what you mentioned is one of the things that people can do. And also we like for people to, for one, to definitely share this information, because many people don't know about Imam Jamil's case. Not only do they not know about his case, but a lot of people don't even know that he's alive and that him and H. Rod Brown are the same person. A lot of people, some people mention H. Rod Brown and think that, you know, this man is dead. And they don't know that it's Imam Jamil and that he's currently incarcerated for a crime that he didn't commit. And just in brief, in terms of really, you know, like just checking the Imam Jamil Action Network .org, you can look on the website and get all the information you need about Imam Jamil's case. You can also go to whathappenedtorap.com. What happened, the number 2, not the word 2. Whathappenedtorap.com will also give you the information that you need. And there's a list of things that you can do on there. One of the things, as you said, is writing Imam Jamil letters. Also, sending money to his commissary, you know, donating to the to his legal defense. You can basically find that information on the whathappenedtorap.com website. And also, again, spreading the information and educating yourself about who he was or who he is and what he's done from his time as a young person up until this day, you know, and just understanding that how this came about and who he was in order for him to be targeted in the way that he is targeted. And just the fact that if you look at Imam Jamil's time, in turn, we know this through the Freedom of Information Act, that they have 44,000 pages of documents on him after he became Muslim. That's not even including what they have previous to him being, you know, who he was in SNCC and NAG and other things that he's done previous to that time. So they have 44,000 pages of documents on this one man. And he's one of the people who was named by name by J. Edgar Hoover as someone who should be neutralized. So we have to take all these things into account and understand, because a lot of people look at it as though they think that, like, why would they do this, or it's not possible, it's not real for them to do something like that, but it is real. And we know it from many other examples that exist from now. We look at, as it was mentioned, Mumia Abu Jamal, Leonard Peltier, And if we go back and look at Fred Hampton and other things that we know that they've done, you know, then all of this is possible. This is nothing like that you have to make up, that you have to be trying. It's not a quote unquote conspiracy theory. You know, this is reality for Black people in this country, and it's been this way since we've been here. And you know, just to keep the advocacy, and to one of the things that we ask too is that people learn about the confession that has been made by the person who actually committed the crime. So you have a situation to where you have someone incarcerated for a crime that someone else is confessing to, and the confession is even being suppressed. So, you know, you would think that that would be something that would be, you know, have people up in arms to say, you know what, you need to really let this man out of prison, or you need to at the least, you know, allow him a new trial. So, you know, there's plenty of things that people can do, but definitely education and spreading the word are two of the main things that you can do.
All right, let me do a quick follow-up to what you just said. Can you tell me who is Otis Jackson and what's his relevance to the Imam Jamil's case? Okay.
Now, Otis Jackson is the person that has confessed to this crime. And when you look at Imam Jamil's case, it started basically in 1999. On May 31st, 1999, he was pulled over in Cobb County, Georgia, for allegedly driving a stolen car and impersonating an officer. To cut out some of the minute details, obviously the car wasn't stolen and he wasn't impersonating an officer. He was given a badge from the sheriff of Whitehall, Alabama, who Imam Jamil was involved in a community building project in Whitehall. And politically, when you look at what he was doing in Whitehall, again, it was an act of self-determination. So we have to understand, and it's important, that the time frame that this took place and his arrest is very critical to understand what he was in the process of doing when he was arrested. So he was pulled over in 99. The court date comes in early 2000. There was a storm in Atlanta, and the courts were shut down. The court date was missed. So they sent out a bench warrant for him, and they sent out this warrant, and they came to arrest him, I believe, in March of 2000. So when they came to arrest him, he wasn't there. It was around one of the Muslim holidays, and he went to Whitehall to be the leader for the congregation in terms of that particular holiday. So he wasn't in Atlanta at the time. Otis Jackson, basically, if you go to whathappenedtorap.com, you can see his confession. He has confessed as recently as 2019 about this shooting. He was on trial for another case, and in that particular case, it came up, and this was on court TV. So this was anyone had to prompt him to confess again, and he's been confessing since early on, since it first happened. And because he's in prison now, he's been in prison, he's not going anywhere. So essentially, he's like, yeah, you know, okay, I did that too. And what happened on the court TV, they had to actually go into a recess because of the fact they weren't expecting him to bring that up. In some kind of way, whatever they said happened to segue into that, because he said, oh, at the time I was shot. They're like, oh, how did you get shot? He's like, because, you know, this happened. And they was like, well, wasn't someone else arrested for that? He's like, yeah, Imam Jamil out of me. He's like, but you did it. He's like, yes, I did it. So, and also when you look at the BOLO or the Be on the Lookout report at the time, it describes someone who was 5'8" and had gray eyes or something to that effect. Anyone that knows Imam Jamil has seen him in person, Imam Jamil is every bit of 6'6". There's no way you can mistake him for being 5'8". You know, there's no way you can do it. And Otis Jackson fits that description. And he was at the scene of the crime at the time. He confessed to the crime. A lot of the forensics were destroyed. The car that belonged to Imam Jamil was destroyed, as opposed to being taken for forensics based upon the reports. There was also a report that Imam Jamil was shot. We remember hearing about the story initially, and because we heard the reports being in various cities, we understood that Imam Jamil was shot at the time. So when they arrested him in Whitehall, Alabama, we seeing this footage on TV, on CNN or whatever it was. And, you know, obviously, clearly he wasn't shot, because our first expectation was that he was going to be wounded or they had killed him. And when you see the footage, when he was arrested, he wasn't shot. So we like, well, they reported that he was shot, but no, Otis Jackson was shot. He was shot by one of the deputies. And if you look at the interview, and if you look at the evidence, it all points to Otis Jackson. He also has been recently interviewed by the Conviction Integrity Unit, which is a unit in Fulton County, Georgia, that has the power to review Imam Jamil's case or just overturn it and set him free. So he was recently interviewed by them. So with that, hopefully, that'll bring about some more movement towards his exoneration. But Otis Jackson is a person that again has admitted guilt to the crime that Imam Jamil is being incarcerated for. As a he's being held in a federal institution for the conviction of a state crime. So the taxpayers of the state of Georgia are funding him being held in a federal institution away from his family, all the way in Arizona, you know, away from his family, away from his legal defense, as opposed to him being kept in the state of Georgia, at least so he can have access to his legal defense and in the court systems there in Georgia.
All right, you bring up a number of interesting points and fodder for more questions, but I'm going to pass it over to Sister Eva.
Okay, thank you, Brother Ibrahim, for that. As Brother Almighty said, I'm sitting here thinking of a lot of things that, a lot of questions that I would have regarding this, but thank you for that information. Sister Afia, can you tell us, give us your opinions about COINTELPRO, the effects it has on our youth activism, and whether or not they are interested in becoming leaders or becoming activists in the community, the ongoing effect of that.
Let me say two things. One is I want to point out that at the time that Imam Jamil was arrested in New York, he was engaged in cleaning up the dope trade in the Black community. I think that that's very important to understand the circumstances under which he got arrested. And in which case it was a political act and a continuation of the commitment of self-determination. The result of that arrest not only meant that the dope trade, the scourge of addiction in the community was restored, but that the leadership and the direction of young people and other people who were opposed to drug dealing in the community were discouraged from engaging in further action. We see that same result when we look at the Black Panther Party, particularly as it is symbolized by the murder, the US government's murder, the use of the local police to kill Mark Clark and Fred Hampton on December 4th while they slept in their beds in order to end the development and the advancement of the original Rainbow Coalition, which was their organizing Latino, poor whites, as well as Black youth to come together to resist the oppression of the US government generally and of the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Daley, specifically. So that carries over to the West End, where Imam Jamil Alamin cleaned up the dope trade and the slum housing in the West End and began to build a healthy community. When he was assaulted by the state in that episode, that meant that the credibility of the community that he had established came under assault also, and the young people on whom he was having an impact also was lost. For generations, he had, I worked with him in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He had a phenomenal ability to influence young people and to build capacity in them. So today, where we would have seen another generation of young people influenced by him, influenced by the likes of Fred Hampton, who was able to bring street organizations to the table and to engage them in political activity, we would not have today, first of all, the level of drug activity and addiction in our communities, nor would our young people be likely to be turning the gun on one another, but on an oppressive and violative government. So his incarceration not only discouraged capacity building, a healthy direction, but it has wreaked havoc on our communities across the nation.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think I have one last question here. I'd like to follow up with this information that you're sharing with us. But do you think there's a story that needs to be told when it, particularly when it comes to Imam Jamil?
Clearly, without a doubt. You know, I do a lot of prisoner support work, and in it, I raise with the brothers with whom I work, the point that there are two kinds of prisoners in the United States. There are, from our community, and that is, there are political prisoners, which are our highest honor and standard. And it's a great honor to have this opportunity to lift up the case of Imam Jamil Alamin. And there are prisoners of politics. And I guess the third category would be criminals themselves, most of whom seem to avoid prison, prosecution, much less prison. Criminals being those people who would pollute the rivers and engage in other kinds of violative acts against humanity. Prisoners of politics are those persons who attempt to survive in the system, for whom survival is a crime and are thereby incarcerated. Political prisoners, prisoners of war, and prisoners of exiles are those persons who recognize and understand the system and make a conscious choice to take action against the system in the interest of the people. There's a point in all of our lives where we make life determinative decisions. That point seems to be when we're like 13, 14, 15 years old, where we take the path of liberation of the people, or what we think is the path of liberation of ourselves. Imam Jamil chose the path of liberation of the people. I think that it's important that his story is told, that a movie is made of it that shows that pattern and what causes the decision maker to choose which direction, and the response of the government to that decision. Young people who are incarcerated without a political ideology, prisoners of politics, are referred to as having made a mistake. The mistake that they purportedly make is that they violated, quote unquote, the law, which is a law that was made for the purposes of ensnaring them in a system that ensures that they will continue to be free labor and fodder for the profitable prison system in this country, the only growing industry in this country. Political prisoners are those persons who take actions that dismantle that system and give us the opportunity for self-determination and the opportunity to live healthy lives. It's imperative that the story of that pattern, as symbolized by Jamil Al-Amin, is told. You know, Imam Jamil was a rapper. The president didn't get into that. People used to enjoy listening to him tell stories in rhythmic and rhyming fashion. He was one of the greatest rappers. So to tell his story as the story of young Black people, generally Black males in particular, would be instructive to an other generation. It is essential, it is useful in the way that we must tell our story and keep our records from one generation to the next. The story of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, from H. Rap Brown to Imam Jamil Al-Amin.
Thank you. I'll say Ashe and pass it over to Brother Omani. Thank you so much.
Thank
As
you.
we wrap this up, Brother Ibrahim, are there any additional comments you'd like to make in terms of what makes him a political prisoner, and just any overall concluding remarks you'd like to make?
Okay, well, first of all, again, I'd like to thank you all for having me on the platform. I really appreciate it. Again, it's an honor to be with Mama Afia. I really, look forward to, continuing in the struggle and being able to help in any way that we're available. But in reference to Imam Jamil, again, you can just go to the website, imamjamilactionnetwork.org, and also the website, whathappenedtorap.com. That's whathappened2rap.com. And just to keep Imam Jamil in your thoughts and your prayers, and again, to spread the information and just, keep up the struggle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of Kwanzaa. Abarigani.
Ujima.